I wanted to offer a quick disclaimer about today's episode. I encountered some technical difficulties with the audio feed. However, the quality of the information provided by today's guests made it well worth releasing this episode just the same. I'd like to welcome everyone back to the We Rush In podcast. I was super excited and honored to have the opportunity to speak to Jeff Johnsgaard on today's episode. He is a Canadian police officer with 19 years of experience. He's currently the firearms and tactics instructor within his agency. He's also a certified advanced specialist by the Force Institute and the Canadian director of the Reality-Based Training Association. He also offers training in decision-making and use of force internationally through his company, Natural Tactical.
Good afternoon, everyone. We have with us here today Jeff Johnsgaard, Natural Tactical Systems, Canadian police officer and founder of that company. Good day, Jeff.
Hey, brother. How are you?
I'm not doing too bad. Happy to have you on here today, and let's just get right into it. Just give us a quick background of yourself.
Sure. Yeah, no, and I apologize, of course, because little does the audience know that this is the second time now, because technology is a wonderful thing that we're doing this. So, just let me know if I say in my mind like I went into something already, which I didn't, because it's deja vu. So
Right.
Here we go. So Jeff Johnsgaard, Canadian police officer in my 19th year. I'm currently a detective sergeant, and our agency is fairly large. It's a municipal agency. We've got about 450 or maybe a little more than that now sworn cops. And, I do training for the agency, and I do training for our police college and things like that. And I suppose that's kind of the main reason why I'm here.
All right. I guess just let's go a little bit into the history of Natural Tactical.
Sure. Well, as we were talking about before and offline, Natural Tactical got formed from years and years worth of just training and mentorship under some, very quality people that I was fortunate enough to come across in my life. And so Natural Tactical, the company itself, the product that I usually get hired to talk about and sell and that type of idea would be kind of, people look at it for tactics, I guess, or people look at it for techniques. But to the audience listening, I guess I would really like to help them delineate or understand that there's really two things that I offer. So one is the techniques. So there are certain things such as the compressed shooting position that was kind of popularized in John. It's an actual thing to gunfight like that. It was invented by this Englishman who died in 2011 of cancer, and he passed the system on to me and things like that. It's an interesting story. Of course, if you want to dive down that rabbit hole, there's a technique. Then there's some other techniques. With the use of the tools for law enforcement, military, which of course is my background, the use of firearms, things like that. But the other thing, remember there's two, so there's the techniques, but there's also the process, and that's really something that is, in my mind, actually kind of the more important, and really leads into several other areas. And so when I say process, I mean, I guess the instructional process, the actual how we go about learning, but I mean so much in such detail to the exact words used, language, very specific language. Be happy to go into that. And that in turn leads to people being able to do physical skills, motor learning, learning faster, and as is evidenced by their ability and their abilities after a time period, both for decision making as well. And of course that decision making piece, dealing with stress, a lot about what first responders, I mean, I'm not a paramedic EMT, obviously my background, law enforcement, military, but I would have to say that especially when there's some high stakes and pressure, whether that's whitewater rafting, rock climbing, dealing with a car accident, something like that, high stakes and pressure, thinking clearly, and then especially when you have to execute on demand to a high degree, physical skills, while your body's going through all these changes, and by that I don't mean puberty, as funny as that sounds, but the stress response and whatever words we're kind of putting to that. And so that process-based stuff, something that was first introduced to me from Ken Murray, who wrote a book called Training at the Speed of Life, Volume 1. I didn't know how much I didn't know of proper training until I met him, and that was a real turning point in my life. And so in turn, the way that we convey these messages, meaning actual, teach people to both learn, right? Because we go through our entire lives and we learn things all the time. Some of them not so positive, some of them, right, and the rest. But we never really formally learned how to learn better, or learned how to learn best. And so there's an entire piece about what I do for that. So although a police agency might have me come in because they're worried about getting ambushed inside a vehicle, they know this compressed shooting position works, for 360 degrees of aim fire from a vehicle. So that's a good thing that I call it like a Lego block. I can teach very quickly in a day or two, instructor class just with a few days on top of that. But the process-based stuff is definitely, in my mind, actually more important, and is the pivotal linchpin kind of key to what it is that we do, because there are these concepts for recovery involved in them as well. So now I realize I've been gabbing on for a few minutes already, but I don't know which way you want to go with it.
Well, no, it's all very interesting.
Yeah, so
I'm interested in for sure.
All right, well, let's talk about that for a minute. I'm certainly not someone that people need to listen to, but I certainly do have a lot of information, as you know, I've gained from experts in the field that has been working quite well. We were talking about it before, but I've been to training with very high-end Tier 1 people in Australia, and I've been to Brazil, I've been to South America, and some federal police, and all sorts of places like that, of course, all over the United States as well. And these skills certainly do work, but even more so, this process stuff is even more interesting and gleaning, because it doesn't matter what technique, it doesn't matter what pistol, it doesn't matter what glove, it doesn't matter what whatever. It's a matter of you being able to learn best. And so I kind of try to pique people's interest, not by saying, I now work out a third as much as I used to. I'm in my 40s now, and I get just as far, if not further, with my physical fitness, etc., by doing a third as much, but I have tripled down on the recovery piece. So that would be the same thing as what we were talking about with learning to learn better, right? You go to the gym and you do some bicep curls, we'll say, or whatever it is that you're doing, hopefully some compound movements, we all know that we don't get stronger in the gym. We get stronger, we repair that muscle, we grow stronger, both neurologically and physically, whether that's hypertrophy, right, muscle gain, or strength, neurological, or whatever shade of conversation you want to have about that, but that happens outside of the gym. And so the same thing happens with motor learning, which is just fancy words for saying physical skill learning. There are set protocols. If we were in the NFL and someone was getting paid a lot of money, they would want to train you in the most efficient way. And the thing is that most police, military, first responders are not getting treated like professional athletes, and it's kind of up to them to learn these things on their own, and more to the point, to put them habitually, rituals in place that help them. And so what I mean by that is to recover, right? Because I'm not concerned. I'm not as concerned. I'm concerned with you surviving your incident. Absolutely. Whatever incident that might be. Car accident, shooting, I don't know what. It depends on who we're talking to and what's going on. But I'm more concerned with teaching you to thrive during the incident and recover, so that you're not an alcoholic divorcee either, right? Because just because you physically made it through doesn't mean that it's not winning. Ken Murray has this concept called the 7 survivals, and I ask anyone interested to just hit pause and Google it. Simply Google Reality-Based Training Association 7, just the number 7 survivals. And he's got a little article on it. But the point being is that you only survive an incident if you survive it in all 7 of these. And so that is physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, right? Legal, both civil and policy at your station, et cetera, because you don't survive the incident if, of course, you get injured, right, and die. Well, that's not surviving. But then if you survive, but you lose your job, or you survive, but you emotionally can't deal with maybe what it is that you've done or did to recover to a point where you're able to do it again. Well, then you didn't survive that again either, right? So hence the alcoholic divorcee, or whatever kind of metaphor, or whichever one of those 7 survivals you're quote unquote failing in, or didn't achieve, right? Yeah. And so I think that's a very, very good conversation to have, because the 7 survivals are literally the center cog in everything that I do. So whatever I'm deciding to do, hold a course, teach my daughter to drive, whatever it might be, I'm trying to think about this 7 survivals aspect. So everything must be 6 o'clock news ready. Right? Is that pun that you'd see it on the the front page of the paper? That kind of idea. Because if we act and it was morally we're fine with it, physically we survived it, maybe even legally we're okay, but the city burns. Well, and the resources of our agency are destroyed, and our relationship with the community is destroyed. Well, then we didn't survive it in that way either. And then what can we do ahead of time to set those things up? Well, the individual officer, maybe not as much, but certainly still things to do. And then, then we start talking about culture and all those other great things. So I'll take it back over to you, because I'd love for this to be a conversation.
For sure. I mean, that's a ton of stuff to think about, for sure. I guess, how have you found incorporating all that just into your own day-to-day life as a law enforcement officer?
Well, I mean, that's taken really a lot of different shades over the years, right? As I said, I'm not long in the tooth yet, but 19 years, all of a sudden, that's a long period of time, right? So, I would say that some of the winning conversations to have with first responders are the ones that, like when I get in front of recruits or some new people or something, the thing that I would love to go back in time and learn or be introduced to, that what I think has helped me the most, and certainly I would hope would help them as well, would be that mindset, mindfulness, resiliency piece. And of course, there's as many definitions to those 3 words as is people on the planet, right? And so what I'm saying when I say that is, for instance, Michael Phelps, right? So I'm sure the audience has heard of this guy named Michael Phelps, a swimmer for the United States, who was very, very good, to say the least. I think it was like 16 gold medals or something like that, right? And so short version of the story is that I had occasion to physically meet him, and so I took that time to interview him. And so what Mr. Phelps said to me was that training his mind was what he considered to be his ace in the hole. Now, to hear someone who has achieved that level, not just gold medal, but several, consistently over a period of time, it was interesting. But once again, words have meaning, and just because he used phrases and things that I understood, or at least thought I understood, I have no idea what mental training means to Michael Phelps. So, of course, I asked questions. I dug much further down in on that, and we can certainly go into it more, but the point being is that he learned how to set himself up for visualizing, as I slur my speech, visualize himself in the pool, for example. Now his event, his incident was, X breaststroke or front crawl, whatever it was. But point being, so he could visualize exactly how many strokes it was, how the turn at the end would be executed, and on and on. So he learned as a young as a young man as well, and so this just got better throughout his age, as he aged and practiced it, how to visualize to an amazingly high degree. So much so that what he claimed to me is that he was merely physically executing what had already taken place. His body, his mind, his spirit had already won, had already gone through the race in the time he wanted to, performing the way he wanted to, several times prior to actually doing it. So that was interesting. Now, we could all, maybe, like, I don't know how to fly a plane, but I could visualize that I'm doing it and think I'm doing a great job. Then I could get in a plane and crash it immediately, right? So that's just, that's that idea, Carol Dweck, Stanford University professor, who kind of coined that term growth mindset as well, right? So it's one thing to say, just because you believe you can do it, that doesn't mean you can, right? Right? I mean, it has to be grounded in reality as well, right? And so there's a little bit more to that growth mindset as a tangential talk or a parallel talk. But the point being is that back to that mental training. So first of all, he learned how to do it. He practiced it a lot. And further, he said that he would then practice from recovering in ways from things so that he got good repetitions of doing that. I found that very interesting. So I asked him to give me an example. I'll share with you. So he said, so he remembers many times visualizing diving into the pool out of the starter's blocks, and his goggle becoming loose and filling with water, so he couldn't see. And so he said this actually happened to him, but he just executed in his mind the visualization. He had already put himself in that situation mentally ahead of time. He knew exactly what he needed to do, keep control of his breathing, how many strokes to take, when to hit the wall and turn around, that kind of idea. And he had already got a gold medal, or he'd already practiced recovering as optimally as possible mentally ahead of time, and then ended up, he accredits his win in that race to that. So, you can see here that to teach a recruit, anyone, how to take failure. What is failure? Is it, because we could have that talk. In fact, Dan, what does failure mean to you? If I were to ask you that,
I guess it depends on a lot of the situation. But I mean, it could be degrees of failure, right? Like in this scenario, I get these things right, but I could have done it better. And with the wrong mindset, you could maybe only see the negative side of that.
Well, now, isn't that an interesting thing to say? So I always say, imagine if we were on video and I put a fist in my face and my upper chest here, and I go, if you shoot a group, soldier, police officer, here and here, which is a good thing on a target that you're supposed to shoot at, but then you shoot one, boom, way over the shoulder like that or something, often never land. What are you going to go home thinking about? The 300 sight alignment, sight press, shots that went well, or the one over there? And most of the time we kind of go, yeah, I'm going to think about that one, right? Going to lament on that one. So if we could learn to take failure and maybe just call it what it is. Failure is feedback. What are you going to do with that feedback that matters? How are you going to unpack, think about, what was the reason that this happened that was not optimal? And then we start talking about those words, right or wrong. Is anything really right or wrong? Well, I mean, yeah, I guess if we were to open the criminal code or something and try and define it's right to do this, it's wrong to do that, perhaps. But, I'm sure that all of us can go back in our minds to almost any incident and think, could have done that a little better, could have done that a little better, whether or not we got through it and got the gold medal or not. Right? And so
100%.
Yeah, so the understanding as to how to take feedback, if failure equals feedback, I just offer that as a mental model, then success actually equals feedback as well. And so then we can have a cool conversation about, are you training for your next fight or your next whatever? Or are you training for your last one? I think it was Tony Blauer that I first heard say that. I'm not sure. I want to give credit where credit's due always. But, what does that mean? Well, are you training for what you think you're going to need to do in order to get through your next incident? Or are you training for your last one, meaning it worked in the last one or didn't work in the last one, so now I need to do these things? Well, you can see how we bias that very easily, don't we? You know, a boxer thinks they need jab, cross, hook, uppercut. A grappler thinks they need grappling. A whatever thinks they need a whatever, right? What is your framework, your process for taking in information, for thinking about your desired end state, and then for unpacking that properly, efficiently? So we're not just talking about movements are efficient, which of course I want them to be, but you know, how to go about doing that, training your brain, training your nervous system. And so where I've ended up now when I talk to, you know, recruits, because this is still that on that question of yours, is that I want them to know, I want everyone to know that really we're talking about your nervous system. There was a time when you got in a vehicle and were completely overwhelmed by everything it took to start it, put it in drive, back out of the driveway safely, right? And there was no,
Yeah.
you know, I bet you had no more attention for anything else. And if I was telling you about that car up ahead, you're at best your eyes are 2 inches in front of the hood, you know, kind of idea. And then as you became more comfortable with it, with operating the tool, the car in this case, or could be, whatever, putting an IV in, or could be, shooting a gun. As you became more confident with those tools, then you freed up more attention. And attention is a limited resource. So you only have so much. And if you have to use all your attention to figure out your car, well, you're certainly not going to perceive the little girl on the bike or something like that. And so now we're starting to kind of unpack some terms, shed a little bit more light onto how we're thinking about things. And that is what I found with Ken Murray, for example, that was kind of the biggest lacking in our communities. It just wasn't done, not because they didn't want to do it, but because we didn't know what we didn't know. And and so that's been now, years and years of research and of application. I've been blessed to be able, as I said, to go and teach with, learn from and teach alongside these high-end units, and then they apply this in the crucible and come back and tell me this is working really well. You know, our young SWAT guys are learning these things so much faster. You know, and we're cutting weeks off introductory, learning packages by the way we go about process teaching and facilitating the learning. So, that's a whole bunch of stuff, but it's some very, 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 very interesting, really efficient ways I wish I would have known, 20 years ago.
Sure. I'm just curious, being that we're not fire or EMS or anything, do you think the processes that allow us to cut time on the learning for these things would apply to any skill?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So if your audience is into it, Google Dr. Gary Klein, Klein, and he's got something called recognition prime decision making. And the short version of that is he has studied firefighters, not just fire, but firefighters, law enforcement, and the military. And he found that expert performers had these certain traits and characteristics and things. And he then developed a way of helping to pass the eyes of an expert performer on. I think he calls it shadow box, something like that. It's quite interesting. We certainly have our own flavor of it that we just find works kind of even a little faster. But point being is that he found that it was, driving, race drivers, for example, decision making, what they're perceiving and how that leads them to the next decision. Firefighters, forest firefighters especially, a little more chaotic is what I'm told that can be, or inside of a structure kind of idea. And then military and police, so it does legitimate have a carryover. In fact, there's two types of long-term memory, right? There's that type of long-term memory I'm reciting from right now that's kind of more conscious, and then there's this unconscious one. All of a sudden I just started doing things. I reacted. I hit the brake and swerved. I got my gun out all of a sudden. I didn't really think about it. There's that as well. And so there are more beneficial ways to get things into that type of long-term memory. And then that ties in, of course, with the recovery pieces, because you want to control your physiology and your psychology under stress. And then stress means two different things, both heart rate increase and hormonal, like stress and pressure. Holy crap, something's really urgent and going to happen. There's my kid, he just got hit by a car or something like that, right? And that's a different heart rate increase. There's a lot of other things that coincide with that are not optimal for decision making, right? And then breath ties in with that, because breath is the one thing that comes into play hugely. Then therefore training the mind. There's a cool study. I can't remember where I saw it now. Where they took basketball three-point shooters, divided them into two groups. They then had one group physically practice and the other group mentally only practice. Then at the end of it, they tested them all again, and they found that the ones who were practicing through visualization, mentally only, improved at almost the same rate as the ones physically, but it was only those who were in the group who already knew the skill fairly well. It wasn't just brand new. Very interesting, right? So that goes towards that mental training that we talked about with Michael Phelps. And then can we use the tool of mental training to even think about things that are, the goggle coming off for him, or, maybe being shot or injured, or having some massive amount of trauma happen, where we are outside of our comfort zone, then calming ourselves down during the visualization, using breath, the physiology to change our psychology and vice versa, and then to practice recovering in an optimal manner, giving ourselves a repetition of doing that, when really we can't otherwise do that, even with high fidelity scenario training, kind of idea. So that's a super, and that's what I do, right? So that's where agencies, realistically, as we talked about before, I've been brought in by schools and brought in by civilian companies to talk about these things as well, and to formulate processes for them, both for risk mitigation and things like that, but also for how they are going to deal with these incidents, and then train for it. I mean, same thing happens for a flight attendant, right? I mean, the same thing happens for, in many professions.
Yeah, it makes sense, because, any line of work, there's that potential for a stressful situation.
Right. So how to take feedback, evaluate, if I were to, Ken Murray says, if I were to walk over to you and take a bucket of crap and dump it on your head, you probably wouldn't be too happy. But if there were a couple of 20-carat diamonds in there, and you got to go have a shower and then keep them, maybe you wouldn't be so upset in the end of it. Well, a lot of instructors, especially military, right, give you that debrief, that 50 caliber finger poking at you. You did this, and this, and are there some diamonds? Are there some gold nuggets in there that actually are good things that you perhaps didn't do well on? Yeah, it's just that it's coated in a bucket of crap, and we have a hard time. We just punish ourselves and tie ourselves in with, I'm not good enough, or I can't learn, or something like that. Well, I go all the way back to grade 6. I don't want to say the teacher's name back then, but she told me that I had poor attention. Luckily, there was no diagnosis back then, and I wasn't good at math. And now I still believe it to this day. When really, is that the case? And then we can study from Dr. Andrew Huberman. If your listeners aren't on his podcast, please do. Another Stanford professor. And he talks all about some very cool things as well, including dopamine reward circuitry, and how when we first start to get into a learning bout, there's this edgy scratchiness to it where it's not easy. And that's the whole point, is that learning must be effortful. Learning is not, if it's easy and it makes sense, then you know it already. But yet when we get to that point where it is kind of, like I said, that edgy, scratchy, I'm not quite getting it, those synapses, those in our brain are just not quite linked up yet, and they're wanting to. And that's what we talk about, or that's when I'm doing training for that agitation, stress, and confusion, we got to tuck into that, and I'll show you how. And in turn, that's where we learn to get to these states of focus, and then we can have a conversation perhaps about flow state or not, and that Mihail Csikszentmihalyi, and what that might mean or not, but just kind of diving down that path a little farther as well. So very, very cool stuff, all on the precipice of it. But once again, it's more important to see how you think than it is about maybe necessarily the technique or the bell or the whistle, that you've got as your thing.
Yeah, and I just wondered, does trading, at least in the past, always seem to focus on the latter of that? And I think they're getting better, and they do talk about mindset and focus, visualization. I've heard a lot about more and more lately. But even back in 2009, when I went through police college, they were even talking about it then during firearms, just picturing yourself on the range, visualizing your qual.
Well, that's excellent. I mean, and furthermore, now visualizing yourself being calm, breathing in that time as you're visualizing it, to link that to it as well. Because breath is that thing that we don't think about doing and can do, and breath is the thing we can think about doing and change. And so there's a lot of breath work is extremely important to understand and use as a tool. So breath is one of the tools I use. Visualization is one of the tools I use. I started fairly early in my career, I would visualize myself as I took my wristwatch off. I would make it a ritual. As I took my wristwatch off, I'd pause, I'd look at it, I'd think about my day, and I would take off my watch. And as I was taking off my watch, I was trying to take off the stress and pressure of that day, so I didn't come home and snap at my kids or my wife or something like that. And it became a ritual for me. I know another friend of mine, he takes his uniform off that way, and he takes off the stress and pressure of the day. He tries to get in a different frame of mind, whether that's a shower or not or whatever, and sometimes we certainly all need that. And then tried to make the transition to home life, because at the end of the day, I feel so bad all the time that the best part of me is spent at work, and then I come home tired again, right? But anyway, so there are certainly these pieces that we can start to put into play. How are you thinking about what it is that you're doing? Did you even know what you were putting your attention on? And now I think that Doc Bill Lewinsky, he has a company called Force Science. If anyone's interested, please Google Force Science in the USA there. They've got a free newsletter, and they've done all sorts of interesting things, such as reaction times, such as attentional studies, memory studies, and it's all based, kind of in and around for law enforcement and the military. It certainly applies to all first responders. Great stuff on sleep and recovery as well. Anyway, point being is that Bill has said to me that he believes attention is kind of the currency of the new age. It's the most important thing. That we're being bombarded for our attention all the time. And attention is necessary in order to, be successful in an incident, especially a physical one that's grasping at our attention, directing our attention to where it's most beneficial. And then we could talk about maybe something called the quiet eye, which is just an external narrow focus of attention. But when I'm training with people, I bring their thoughts to, or their attention to, that there are 4 quadrants of attention: internal, external, and then narrow and broad in both of those. And then we build a mental model for driving the car, for working the tool, for thinking in our incident. We build this richer mental model using those quadrants of attention on purpose, and we build feedback. So I create through this thing called owning the trigger, feedback with your trigger, for example, that you just never knew was even possible. You thought you knew how to work a trigger, and now all of a sudden I've made it rich, deep, alive, and meaningful to the point where there's like 3, 4, 5, 8, 10 parts to it. And now you're able to then practice to such a higher degree, you can't help but focus more when doing so, and that in turn creates better synaptic response pattern, etc. And that's all through like I said, the funny use of language, right? What's called the meta model, using language to clarify language. It's a term in NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. Whether you believe in it or not doesn't matter, because it works.
Yeah, it has to. If it's working, how can you argue that it doesn't work?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I guess we could touch into that. You call it the quiet eye or the silent eye.
Oh, sure, yeah. So, I mean, I guess now would be, I would ask your viewers to simply hit pause, go watch this 5-minute video. So it's just simply Google, YouTube, Calgary Police, Calgary Police, and Quiet Eye, Quiet Eye. And there's this video, and it's from Force Science, the company I already mentioned before. And go watch that and come back, and then so we'll pretend like they just did. And so now what they just saw was some expert performers, and they were like tactical response unit trained SWAT kind of people. And then there was some regular officers not as highly trained in SWAT. And they were all kind of basically put in a box on the floor where they were to stand, and they had this pistol that shot paint, and they had a scenario evolving to their front, and they put these glasses on them that showed exactly where they were looking, and that's super interesting. Okay. So if everybody, I realize this is audio only, but it's super easy to do, just extend your arm out, put your thumb up, and I'm just sitting in my wife's office right now. So as I turn, I see there's the light switch on the wall. I cover that light switch with my thumb, and that's basically the width of my thumbnail. You got something there, Dan?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so you're covering whatever that is. At arm's length, the width of your thumbnail represents about 3 to 5 degrees of visual angle, so like degrees-wise, right? Of course, further away, it'll cover more. Closer up, it'll cover less, right? And so the interesting thing here is your central vision. It's called your fovea, F-O-V-E-A, foveal vision, which is your most highly accurate and acute vision. It's where we see fine detail and color in the center of our eye. That is only that big as your thumbnail. So imagine, here's the cool part, that's the only thing that you can see clearly is what's inside your thumbnail at any given distance. And I'll pause for effect, because the first time I heard that I was like, what? Right? Like, so Dan, I mean, you can see things in your room, right? There's stuff all over the place, whether or not you're, but what I'm saying is because of how the eye work, and those rods and cones, they're actually the cones in the center that see detail and color, they're the ones that are only that, they're only that much in that degree. And so you can catch things in your peripheral vision very quickly and easily, but then you orientate your eye, head, etc. towards them in order to find out what the heck they actually were. So isn't it interesting to know we could see Wayne Gretzky on the ice, or we could see Roger Federer on the tennis court, or whatever your sport is, and we can see where they're looking, but we actually don't know what thumbnail they are looking at. Is he looking at the ball? Is he looking at the person? Is he looking at the... That's the only thing that they can actually see properly, accurately. And every time you shift your eyes around, you're missing little fractions of a second because you're not seeing anything. These little saccades, these little movements of the eye. And so in the Quiet Eye video, we could see, and I think it was talked about by Dr. Joan Vickers, Calgary professor who kind of coined the term, kind of found it, that we could see the expert performers were setting themselves up for looking. They were more likely to understand how something was going to evolve and where to look next to get that information. So interesting in that study is that the expert performers were not were not moving, were not firing any faster than the other officers, but they were shooting sooner, and they were making overall far better shoot no shoot decisions and accuracy decisions versus everyone else. And until we dove into exactly where their eye was looking, we had no idea. And so that's what I'm talking about when we talk about attention as well, because attention is both your mentality, right? Your mental focus and your eye on that part. I could kind of fake you out a little bit by looking over like to the side and pass the ball or something like that, right? Yeah. But, you know, so there's a split of attention there. But that is where a higher quality conversation comes from. So the quiet eye, and please feel free to go to my website, naturaltactical.com. I wrote 2 articles on the quiet eye on there for free, dealing with kind of a little bit to do with gun presentation and gunfighting and that. So it'll tell you what it is and why and all that on there. And any questions, please just, as always, email me or I'll come back on and talk more about it. But point being is that an external focus as well as narrow, right? So that's what we're talking about. During the execution of a motor skill, this is a critical thing. So the quiet eye is, I put my eyes at a specific place and leave them there within 3 degrees of visual angle for 100 milliseconds or longer, prior to the critical movement in the task, prior to taking that 3-point shot in basketball, prior to releasing the shot in biathlon, things like that. And this has been greatly studied with Olympic athletes, NBA, NFL, PGA, on and on and on. So very, very cool stuff. They also found that it was a way of handling arousal, handling stress. So imagine now I'm visualizing something happening horrible. My partner's shot. I've got a broken arm. I got to get my gun out with a different hand. It's all sorts of a shit sandwich. Pardon my French there, but but I can calmly think about how it's best to go about doing these skills, getting my gun, staying calm, and what is the next thing I need to focus on external in order to solve the problem. Right? And so that's where we have to, what we're missing the boat because we're at the wrong dock when we instruct, is we are not defining these terms. People don't even know about the rods and cones in their eyes. They don't even, like, it just, all that stuff is just like, I didn't know what I didn't know, rather than talking about it, rather than my going, hey, what did you even see your front sight during that shot? Right, or something like that. So when you're saying we're doing a better job of educating, that's excellent, and the why rides underneath it. I don't want you to do it because I do it because I have instructor on my shirt, whether I perform it well or not. Hopefully I do. But I want you to do it because you believe with every cell, including that one in your tailbone somewhere, that it works for you. And now we're having a very good conversation about the confidence-competence loop. Just imagine a circle. Confidence promotes competence, a little arrow, right? And competence promotes confidence. It's a vicious circle we're trying to perpetuate. And that now is leading us to taking ownership, having agency in our lives. Oh, I can't say what my boss is going to be like tomorrow, but I do know how I'm going to react to it. And I can set myself up ahead of time as I best can in order to, work under the stress pressure they may or may not be creating, right? Yeah. And now that I think that's the conversation that really needs to be dug in on. Sure, agencies are coming out with resiliency and mindfulness training, and that's wonderful and needs to happen. More to the point, it needs to be linked in a meaningful way to actionable habits and rituals that set me up beforehand, right? With mental body armor as well, right?
Very interesting stuff. I'm hoping I'll definitely get some of the links on the show notes for this. Quick question, kind of going back to CQD, and I think we discussed this before, but do you think CQD in all of its components, obviously after the conversation we've just had, should be or could be incorporated well into police training? especially keeping in mind that lowest common denominator. Not everybody's going to be able to operate at the same level, but from what you've said, at least some of the basic techniques don't require that high level of skill to be useful.
Wow, yeah. So that's where I'm different from others, right? So a lot of times you bring in companies that come in with very high performing instructors, and everybody tries to mimic them, right? But what I do is I come in and I literally take an entire SWAT team and we go to like the 2-yard line and we hang out for hours, and I guarantee that they will leave there knowing what they didn't know, or knowing what they thought they already knew, to a level that is so much more rich, deep, and meaningful. And that's my point. So yes, there are definitely the running and shooting and all the cool stuff and quick, moving quick and scenarios and high, realism and blood spurting and and all that. Absolutely. But crawl, walk, run, what level, how to understand how they are using their tools, their mental model for the trigger, the grip, the draw stroke, to a way that was so much more in depth that they just simply didn't know they didn't know it. They didn't know it to that level before. That's what I do. And then I would take that confidence, competence, reinvest it in that, that we talked about already, and then we can start doing things that are even more, quote, high end. So it is absolutely for everyone, to the point where I just have to say, put my money where my mouth is, right? Like, just let me show you, because you all of a sudden, after a few hours, we're having conversations. Everyone's asking these such higher quality questions they didn't even know before. They're in a room that didn't exist to them up until that point, even though they've been on a SWAT team for 10 years, something like that. And so if that's valuable, which I've never had anyone say isn't, then I show them how to sharpen it. And then more importantly, I show them how to do that with everyone else, because there's only so many of me, and I would rather teach people how to, go and, teach people how to teach people to fish, right? That kind of idea.
Right. Yeah, for sure. There's just so much we could talk about. I mean, this could go on for. There's way more meat and potatoes here to get into. I think we're just going to have to probably continue this another time. Come up with a whole bunch more questions.
Well, I realized this was kind of a real wide smattering of stuff. So, if there's any feedback from your audience, I'll come. I would love to come back on sometime. We can be a little more specific. Whatever. I'd be happy to do that. Sure. Absolutely. And I just want to say, I know I said it on the other recording. I don't think I said it on this one. That I'm just very honored to be in this space. To have these conversations. I'm by no means an expert in any of this. I've not just to be humble about it, but just to say that it is a very, very important space to offer our communities, and that's up to the point of even protection-minded civilians, and that the ability to come together and to grow, more optimal. Really, really about that. And I just thank you very much for this opportunity. I look forward to doing it again.
Yeah, really happy to have you on. Really happy you could join me, and it's greatly appreciated.
My pleasure, Dan. My pleasure.
Thank you.